Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the book launch of the book Indus Waters and Social Change by Sayyid Ali Naqvi. Uh, we begin the session with introductions of the learned author and the panelist. I start with myself. I happen to be the moderator of this program. My name is Numan Ahmed. I teach at the NED University of Engineering and Technology. The learned author of this particular volume is Sayyid Ali Naqvi, who is no stranger to the people familiar with the water resources affairs in this country. But to in fact inform our audience, let me go through some of the salient contributions and achievements of Naqvi Saab. Naqvi Saab is a veteran engineer. He was born in Amroha, United Province, after obtaining a graduate degree from the Aligarh Muslim University in Aligarh. He occupied number of very distinguished positions related to water management and resources development affairs in the Water and Power Development Authority in Pakistan, and also undertook number of assignments abroad. He has been a consultant and advisor to number of international agencies, including the World Bank. Apart from the technical side of the personality of Naqvi Saab, he is also an art lover. He is also someone who is very much affiliated with the literary scene, especially related to poetry. And I must mention that he is a cousin of the noted painter and calligraphist Sadiq Khan. On my left, second to Naqvi Saab is seated Dr. Ejaz Nabi, who happens to be visiting professor currently at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, a very well-known professional who has not only occupied distinguished positions academically, but has contributed very useful advice to various professional assignments in the country and abroad. Mr. Nabi was educated at the London School of Economics and received his PhD from Warwick University in the United Kingdom. Sayyid Akbar Zaidi is a distinguished academic, writer, and prolific political economist. Apart from his interest in political economy, he has great interest in development, the social sciences, and more generally in the history. He has written over 70 papers on different topics of social sciences, political economy, and related fields. One of his recent books, Military, Civil Society and Democratization in Pakistan, examines the political economy of the Musharraf regime. Currently, Professor Zaidi is teaching at the Columbia University in the United States, where he is contributing his work to two different units of the university, the School of International and Public Affairs and the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian and African Studies. So the format of this session is such that Naqvi Saab is going to talk about the salient aspects of the book that he has written, and then it will be followed by comments from Dr. Ejaz Nabi and Dr. Sayyid Akbar Zaidi. So without any further ado, I request Naqvi Saab to enlighten the audience about his work.
Numan Saab. जी 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 अब ठीक है जी Mr. Moderator, I would like to start by thanking the OUP for holding this event for my book. To begin with, I will say that Indus is liquid history. And this is what my book is about. A British liberal politician, John Burns, said The Thames is liquid history. To an American who had compared the Thames disparagingly with Mississippi. Indeed, the Thames is liquid history, and so is the Indus. And I wouldn't compare Indus with Thames. Anyway, my book presents 9 millennia of liquid history. Looking at the ages and eras shaped by the Indus from the ancient times to the present time, and argues that the Indus has been an engine of social change ever since the food gatherers inhabiting in parts of the region began transforming into food producers some 9 millennia ago. The earth scientists tell us that the Indus existed before the Himalayas started to rising some 90 million years ago, following the collision of the Indian plate with the Asian plate. Earlier, the Indian plate was lying near the southern coast of Africa and was separated from Eurasia by Tethys Ocean, formed roughly 94 million years ago. Besides the Indus, the Brahmaputra and Satluj were the other great rivers existing before the rising of the Himalayas. These formed a single stream which was draining into Tethys Ocean. Conceivably, with the rise of the Kailash range of the Himalayas, some 25 to 20 million years ago, not long time, 25 to 20 million years ago, the Indus Brahmaputra stream is split into two rivers, with the Indus flowing in the northwesterly course and the Brahmaputra taking an easterly course. Now let me tell you how the Indus got its name. The early Aryan immigrants to the Indus Valley, 1500 million BC or earlier. The mighty Indus was Sindhu, Sanskrit word for river, and the land was Sapta Sindhu, the land of 7 rivers. When Darius, the great king of Persia, dispatched an expedition to prove the feasibility of a sea passage from the mouth of the Indus to Persia and annexed the region to his Persian Empire in 500 BC, the Persians pronounced the Sanskrit word Sindhu as Hindu, and thus the river Hindu Darya, and thus named the river Hindu Darya and called the land Hapta Hindu, the land of 7 rivers, which was considered to be the richest and most populous province of the Persian Empire. Some 2 centuries later, the Macedonian Greeks who invaded the land under Alexander the Great in 326 BC pronounced the Persian word Hindu as Indus and named the region India. Most of the region which was India to Greeks now forms Pakistan. After his soldiers refused to plunge further into unknown lands, Alexander took his army down the course of the Punjab rivers and the Indus to sea. Early in October 325 BC, Alexander, having spent 10 months on the voyage down the Indus River, quitted the neighborhood of the present-day Karachi and went to Mesopotamia. He died in Babylon near the modern Baghdad in 323 BC. To the inhabitants of Tibet, where the source of the Indus lies, it is Sinkabab, the Lan River. To the inhabitants of the river's northern reaches, it is Abbasin, father of the rivers. To the inhabitants of the plains, it is Darya Sindh, and to the inhabitants of Delta region, it is Mehran. Because the script has not yet been deciphered, no one knows what the citizens of Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization, 2600 to 1800 BC, called this mighty river to which they owed their existence and possibly ultimate demise. Notwithstanding its several names, internationally it has come to be known as the Indus. The thesis argued in the book is that the process of social change in Pakistan is the process of transition of the agrarian society to an industrial one linked to and made possible by the harnessing of the Indus waters. The term social change in the book, now this is important, the term social change in the book denotes the change in the social relations of economic production. The thesis is based on a study of the impact of the harnessing of the Indus waters on the evolution and development of the fabrics of society in the region from prehistory times to the present. The Indus basin has one of the most fertile soils in the world due to the sediments deposited by the Indus rivers. The book surveys the socio-economic evolution in the Indus basin over the prehistory phases which witnessed the rise of agricultural communities from 7000 BC to 2600 BC and over the historical phases from the times of the Indus civilization to 2600 to 1900 BC to the present times, and argues that the social change in Pakistan is inextricably linked to the harnessing of the Indus water. The first agricultural communities of the South Asian subcontinent in the Neolithic or New Stone Age were established in the Indus basin in what is the present day Mehergarh, below the Bolan Pass in Balochistan. The Indus basin witnessed the transition to Bronze Age from 4000 to 3000 BC. Concentration of the sites of the period have been found in parts of the districts of Bhawarpur in the Punjab, Pakistan. Over the period from 2600 to 1900 BC, there flourished on the banks of the Indus and its tributaries one of the world's finest urban societies, a contemporary of those on the Nile and Euphrates, and a rival for the tag of cradle of civilization. The civilization subsisted primarily by farming, supplemented by an appreciable commerce. Over the period from 1900 to 1500 BC, the Indus witnessed the incursion of Aryan tribes from Iran. Then for many centuries, the urban civilization remained extinguished in the Indus region. Nevertheless, the coming of the Aryans into the Indus region was one of the greatest landmarks in the history of the region. I might add this thing that there has a lot of controversy as to whether how the Indus civilization disappeared. But what is generally accepted is that the Indus civilization started declining and declined fully by 1900 BC. And the Aryan's first scripture, which is Rig Veda, that is about 1500 BC. So there are about 400 centuries between complete collapse of the Indus civilization, as civilization, but and and uh, and the settlement of the Aryans in this region. They came as nomadic tribes, pastoral tribes. The holy book Rig Veda, 1500 BC, it speaks of the settlements. The Indo-Iranian Aryans, also known as the Vedic Aryans, introduced the domesticated horse and a horse-drawn chariot, which has prominent place in Rig Veda, and the Iranian sculpture is the Avesta. Around 1000 BC, by which time the Aryan tribes had acquired the iron, which enabled them to make the tools needed to clear the jungles. The larger part of the tribes crossed the Punjab eastwards and moved to the Ganges basin. Some 5 centuries later, in 500 BC, as already mentioned by me earlier, the Persians under Darius annexed the Indus region to their empire. Then in 3rd century BC, the region was invaded by Macedonians under Alexander the Great. My book describes in detail the prominent milestones in the historical process of social change that took place during the post-Alexander incursion eras, which spanned about 2,300 years and comprised the Mauryan Empire, which characterized by the rise of craftsmen guilds. The Central Asian kingdoms in post-Mauryan times, AD 300 to 700, characterized by the rise of mercantile communities. The Guptas, Huns and Harsha, AD 300 to 700, characterized by the rise of feudalism. This is important to note, that the rise of feudalism took place in this region in about 300 to 700 BC. The Arab kingdoms in Lower Indus, AD 712 to 1026, characterized the rise of the urban culture. The Delhi Sultanate of Turko Afghans, 1206 to 1526, characterized by profound cultural, social and economic changes. The Mughal Empire, 1556 to 1707, characterized the reinforcement and furtherance of all these changes, and the British colonial times, 1843 to 1947, characterized by extensive development of Indus waters and profound political, social, cultural and economic changes. The British annexed Sindh in 1843, and 5 years later they annexed the Punjab in 1848. In Sindh, the Indus became the focus of attention of the British administration soon after the annexation. The British had to assume the responsibility for the maintenance of a large number of Indus River fed irrigation systems and the flood protection dikes constructed by farmer rulers of the province. The Sakkar barrage was built by the British in 1920s and 1930s. Inaugurated in 1932, it was noted as the world's largest irrigation structure at that time. The development of the Indus waters during the British Raj is discussed in detail in my book. This includes the construction of the world's largest contiguous network of the canals and establishment of great canal colonies. These colonies became significant engines for agricultural development and social change. This is a very important thing to note, these canal colonies. The area that became, unfortunately I couldn't contact Imran Ali, who has done a lot of work. I must recognize and I have acknowledged that in my book. The area that became Pakistan at partition was characterized by feudal landlords and tribal society. The British had exploited and strengthened these social systems for their own administrative and colonial purposes. I have discussed this history in detail in my book. Post partition, there was an inevitable dispute over the Indus waters as a result of how the Indus basin was partitioned by the British. In April 1948, only 6 months after the partition, few months after the partition, India stopped the water supply from the Satluj and Ravi rivers, which are two major tributaries of the Indus. This was a severe crisis and a seminal moment for Pakistan in planning its agriculture and economic viability and security. I might add that they also stopped electrical supply also, which was coming from Mandi hydroelectric plant. And it was coming to Lahore and from Lahore to Lalpur at that time. Lalpur, which is now called Faisalabad. This triggered the need for a comprehensive water sharing treaty, which was negotiated under the auspices of the World Bank and signed by India and Pakistan in 1960. And to this day, the Indus Water Treaty remains one of the World Bank's major and remarkable achievements. Under the treaty, Pakistan had to replace river water supplies from the three eastern rivers, Ravi, Beas and Satluj, by diverting waters from the western rivers, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, through inter-river link canals. The treaty also necessitated the building of two large reservoirs in Pakistan, one on the Jhelum, Bangla Dam, and the other on the Indus, Tarbela Dam. My involvement in the Indus, in the liquid history, spans half a century and began in 1951 when I joined the Central Engineering Authority of Pakistan in Karachi. In 1956, I joined the office of the Pakistan Irrigation Commissioner in Lahore to oversee the implementation of the interim agreements between India and Pakistan on sharing the waters of the Indus rivers, while negotiations between India and Pakistan for the Indus Water Treaty were in progress in Washington under the auspices of the World Bank. In early 1958, I started working on Mangla Dam project, in which a dam was planned to be built on the Jhelum River, a tributary of the Indus. With this began nearly 2 decades of my involvement with large or mega dams in senior executive and managerial positions in the Water and Power Development Authority of Pakistan, WAPDA. Mangla Dam is one of the world's largest earth-filled dams. The main dam is about 2 miles long and has a reservoir that holds more than 7 million acre feet of water, including 2 million acre feet due to the recently completed raising of the height of the dam by 30 feet. The hydroelectric power station produces 1,000 megawatts of electricity. The dam was designed by British and American consulting engineers, Binney and Partners in Harza, and built by American consortium during the 1960s. The spillway at Mangla this is interesting and important to note. The spillway at Mangla can release a maximum flow of 1 million cubic feet per second. Just to give you a comparison, that is 10 times the flow rate of Niagara Falls in its high season. 10 times. And it did happen. It's not just in the books, design books. It just happened in 1992 that it released full design discharge capacity in 1992. after Mangla, and it survived. That is very important. Nothing happened to the structure. The downstream there was lot of problem, but not on the. After Mangla, I worked on Tarbela Dam on the Indus River. This project was significantly larger than Mangla. Its reservoir is 1.5 times the size of Mangla, and the power generation capacity is 3 times Mangla. Tarbela was designed by a New York-based American firm of engineers called TAMS. The dam was built by a European consortium led by an Italian construction firm in 1970s. In later years, I worked on the proposed Carabao Dam on the Indus at its project planning stage. I also worked on the Cheshma Right Bank irrigation project. In 1993, I worked on the plans for modification of the project for a canal in Sindh. This is northwest canal which takes off from Sakkar Barak. The extreme scarcity of drinking water and the difficult lives of the people in the area were terribly disappointing to observe. It was the month of May or June when I was there, and I happened to see Jacob Abad at that time. It was so hot, and one water, and how the people were taking water. This just is unbelievable. It seemed to me that the tremendous investment in irrigation infrastructure over the previous decades had not created the social change and benefits to the extent many of us had hoped for. I wanted to understand for myself this gap in results achieved. I began my early research in subsequent years. The result of my study and, and the knowledge I gained are embodied in this book. My book makes the great point that it was due to the wealth created by the cultivators of the Indus Basin lands by harnessing the Indus waters that the Indus Basin has attracted hordes, hordes of migrants, invaders and conquerors from the west and northwest over the period from the 18th century BC to earlier to mid 18th century AD. However, at the inception of Pakistan in the 20th century, the social and economic structure of the region was almost entirely agrarian, with 85% of the population living in rural areas. Pakistan is still largely agrarian, with more than 60% of the population economically dependent on agriculture. Despite the enormous wealth created with the help of huge irrigation infrastructure built over the past 150 years, this large population remains overwhelmingly illiterate, poor, and tied to ancient customs and traditional agricultural practices. The socio-economic structure of a substantial part of the region remains fettered by the age-old feudal and tribal systems. The book makes a critical assessment of the disappointing pace of social change process as indicated by the sluggish pace of industrialization of agriculture in Pakistan due to lack of investment in this vital sector of the country's economy. Finally, my book highlights and discusses three chief impediments in the slow-moving process of the social change in Pakistan. These impediments, apart from the many challenges that the country is facing, are number one, the ineffective and inefficient use of the Indus waters, the ineffective and inefficient use of the Indus waters. Number two, the ineffective and inefficient use of the agricultural land. And number three, the ineffective and insufficient use in ineffective and inefficient use of the human resources. The book maintains that the existing socio-economic structure, which is dominated by feudal or semi-feudal class, constitutes the root cause of these impediments. I now conclude by stating that the purpose of my book, purpose of my writing this book was to encourage and promote an informed debate on how best to overcome the impediments in the process of economic development and social change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naqvi Saab. For the benefit of our audience, let me say that the book is, despite the volume and length of the book, which runs into almost 844 pages, it is written in a very reader-friendly style and is interspersed with some very exciting couplets from the Oriental poetry. That makes it all a treasure, a pleasure to read, and in fact introduces some very important attributes related to Indus and the spread out civilization that Naqvi Sahib just introduced to us in a very reader friendly way. I now request Dr. Ejaz Nabi to enlighten the audience about his comments on the volume.
Actually, I'm going to be very, very brief. Akbar has some interesting comments to make, and then maybe I can pick up afterwards. This is an ambitious book, but it is so well anchored in the reality of Pakistan that it almost carries the objective that it sets out for itself. Like all good books, it can be read at many levels. The first level, of course, is that it's a highway to the past. And it's a real highway. It's not an imagined highway. We have the waters, we have the Indus River, and we have the waters that flow into the Indus River. So it's a very real highway into the past. And there, I think this book ranks almost, among the 4 or 5 good books we have on this area. We have Etazaz Essence, in the saga, we have Romela Thapur's History of India, and we have, of course, Irfan Habib's History of People of India, People's History of India. So I think it sort of belongs there if you look at it from the angle of this being a highway to the past. But there's a second level at which you can read the book, which is this is a book about managing transition. The big transition was, and the role of water in that. The big transition, of course, was moving from the medieval times to the modern times. And by modern times, I mean the colonial period, because that's when engineering and rational thought and scientific method began to be used in order to harness nature for the good of man. So there's a lot of very, very rich material in the book on how that initial transition was managed from medieval to modern times. But to me, the really important strength of this book is the subsequent transitions that it talks about. One is the transition of managing the division of the waters in 1947. As the book tells us, on April 1, 1948, India shut off the waters, and India also shut off the electricity that came with the water, whatever little there was of it. So there we were, a young nation having to cope with a major crisis, and how that crisis was managed is actually, it is useful to read it, because in these difficult times that the country is facing, it is good to know that all has not been failure, that we've had important successes. So I strongly recommend that we read the book from that angle. The transition in particular of harnessing the Indus to deliver to us what we have today. I know these are times of shortages of electricity, not enough water for the farms, etc., etc. Nonetheless, if you look at how much Pakistan added to that basic infrastructure based on the Indus River, is truly impressive. I don't want to go through as a long list the number of barrages that were built, the number of link canals that were built, the number of additional land that was brought into cultivation, and the fact that we at partition had maybe 25 megawatts of electricity, and hydroelectric power generation is now 6,500 megawatts. So these transitions carried out by economic managers of Pakistan with the help and support, of course, of the engineers, is something that we need to remind ourselves of, because everything wasn't bad after 47. I think the third level at which this book can be read is a purely engineering angle of what a vast, ambitious task it was to take the waters of the Indus system, knowing fully well that the waters of Beas and Satluj and perhaps even Ravi would sooner or later, without partition, would have been utilized to irrigate land in Rajasthan and etc. In eastern Punjab and eastern to areas east of our border. Taking the waters of the Indus River and Jhelum River, which were flowing into the sea, and bringing them to cultivate the lands that had been colonized of the Doabas of Punjab and later of Sindh, I think was a huge feat. And reading this book really brings to life that engineering feat and how it in turn contributed to the social development in Pakistan. To me, reading that the engineering side came home very recently, a friend of mine and I, we decided that we'd go and visit South Punjab before we get too old to do it. So we went on this trip and we looked at maps and we looked at various guidebooks. And there's a delightful little book, it's a 100-page book. It's called Glimpses of Ancient Punjab by Buddha Prakash. And what he did was that in the area that we wanted to visit, he had a very nice write-up of how Alexander, who you mentioned, how Alexander had come off the boat because he was being attacked by the tribes along the river to teach the locals a lesson. And he attacked the citadel of Kamalia, crossed over Ravi, attacked the citadel of another small town on the other side of the Ravi, Talamba, and then went on to Multan to attack that citadel, where he got injured and subsequently died. So we decided that part of what we would do on this trip is follow that path. And he has a very vivid description based on the accounts of the historians who traveled with Alexander, of how he traveled from the confluence of Jhelum and Chenab to Kot Kamalia on the banks of river Ravi to basically attack the citadel and kill as many people as he could. And the description is of an utter wasteland. It took him a day and a night to cross that wasteland to reach Kot Kamalia. And here we were driving in a Toyota Corolla with land which looked like paradise to us. It was fertile, it had crops of all varieties, it had orchards, it had wagon loads of sugar cane being taken to the mills. And Kot Kamalia was not the citadel of scared people, but it was a bustling market town. Now, so we wondered, how would we explain to Alexander this transition? And Naqvi Sah's book would be a terrific guide to Alexander to understand how that piece of hell can be transformed into very rich and productive lives. So there's that angle, and I strongly suggest that we read the book from that angle. Finally, for me, the lasting image of Naqvi Sahib and the book will be when my wife and I, we were in Manhattan, and we saw a very impressive, beautiful structure. It said New York Public Library, and we decided to go into the library. And suddenly my wife comes to me and says, Naqvi Sahib is sitting right over there. And there was Naqvi Sahib working on the manuscript. And for me, that is one more reason for reading the book. Now, of course, we have many challenges going forward. Naqvi Sahib talks about a somewhat less successful transition of going from agriculture to manufacturing. And I fully subscribe to that. We know that Pakistan's economic managers have devised a policy framework that is, throughout the last 60 years, has been much more supportive of consumption than of saving and investment. And I can, my daytime job is to be an economist, so I can list all the various reasons why this has happened. But Naqvi Sahib's book gives us a very good insight that the pattern of land distribution, which was the first part of the transition, in a sense created a consumption-oriented society. And that tradition has continued on as we move to the manufacturing sector as well. So modern allocation of resources by economic managers is heavily influenced by stakeholders who come from that thinking that consumption today is to be preferred over saving and investment and consumption tomorrow. Because I think the book gives a very nice insight into that. The book merely alludes to, but I think this is something that remains for others to pick up on, which is that how will we manage the transitions that we need to make going forward. And by that, what I mean is that, so far our agricultural growth has kept in mind that land is a scarce factor. So we should maximize returns to land. As we go forward, the water will be the scarce factor. So we have to reorient ourselves to thinking, how do we maximize returns to water? Once that happens, we will begin to address the issues that John Briscoe, I don't know if you're familiar with John Briscoe's name. If you're not, even though you're in Karachi, I strongly recommend that you should read that book. The book is called The Indus River, Indus Economy Running Dry, and it tells you what the challenges are going to be going forward as water becomes more scarce. So if we reorient our thinking and start to think of water as the scarce factor on which returns are to be maximized, I think that will help enormously in getting there. And I think the transition will also involve re-engaging with India yet again. And I think, and I'm strongly of the view that despite some of the bitter experiences of the past, the best way to engage with India is to be engaged in lots and lots of different ways, so that there are real costs of shutting one tap down or two taps. And that means that have a very comprehensive engagement with India, a comprehensive relationship with India, not because of what Bollywood has to offer or what Indian manufacturers have to offer, but because of where we are to maximize the benefits of our location. We are located at a critical juncture, which 50 years ago it didn't matter that we were not engaged with what was happening in Western China or what was happening in Central Asia or what was happening in Western Iran, Eastern Iran. But that has changed now. These are regions of prosperity, and they're likely to grow at very high rates in the coming years. We are located at a point where we can have lots of very good, profitable complementary relations with these regions. And I think that's where engaging with India will have a terrific impact. So my view is that on water, we will have difficult relations with India, but a comprehensive relationship in which we engage, I think, will help us address the water issues. But also, I think reading the book is useful because an effective way of engaging with India will be that we understand the systems that we have inherited. We understand the water that we have. We understand the engineering side of it. That will make for a much more productive engagement with India than what I often read in the papers, which is not based on real understanding of the issues. So let me stop.
Thank you, Ijaz Sahab. Just to reflect on one very important achievement in the post-independence period of Pakistan's history, somewhere around 1951, the overall farmed land in the West Pakistan, what was then West Pakistan, was a little over 8 million hectares. And with all the developments that took place around the water resources of Indus and its tributaries, about 50 years from then, in 2002 and 2003, it came to about 18.6 million hectares of land. Such a phenomenal growth is extraordinary. And what Ijaz Sahab rightly pointed out, it is time that we focus on not only conserving resources, but at the same time look at maximizing the returns on what is already available. I now request Professor Akbar Zaidi to enlighten the audience about his take on the book.
Ji, it's on? Okay, thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Is it on? Yes? Okay. Thank you, Noman. I'm glad Ijaz has spoken about what the book means, where it's located, and he's spoken about agriculture and changes in agriculture and the reasons why one should befriend India and have better relations and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk about the book, the text, what it does, because that's what I was asked to do. There's no doubt about this. I've known Sayyid Ali Naqvi for about 15 years. There's no doubt about this, that this book shows that maybe 30 years have been spent on this book, thinking about it, writing about it, and getting it down, getting it into 800 pages. It contains 9,000 years of history, which itself is something that most people would fear even thinking about and putting down on paper. But that's what Naqvi Saab has done. It's a book which has, as Ijaz also said, a great deal of information, background about dam building, about engineering. It talks about and in detail about Marxist political economy. It talks about history. It talks about politics. It's about social change. It's about all these things. It has everything that one can think of in any sort of book. It even has a lot on Ghalib. In fact, the best, one of the delightful things, and there are a number of delightful things in this book. One of the delightful things is that the first reference in this, in the bibliography, is a book of by Ghalib, a translation of Ghalib. Sayyid Ali Naqvi is not an academic, but in many ways, this is an academic book. As I said, it has everything one can think about. I think that's also the problem with this book, that he has tried to do everything that one can think about and put it in one book. I have read 800 and whatever pages Noman counted, every single page. And I feel that, this is a book which needs to be read by people, but I feel that had this been about 300 pages, and focused on key areas such as dams and engineering and things like that, I think that would have been far more productive. This book weighs about 2.2 kilograms. It costs 3,000 rupees, which I think is a bit steep by any sort of standards. So it's unfortunate that it's going to be priced out of a market where I think it needs to be read. There's no doubt about the fact that it needs to be read. I think the problems, I'm going to talk about the problems because I think it's important also to talk about an academic book, a book that has come into the market, and I think one needs to discuss those issues as well. Sayyid Ali Naqvi, as far as I can tell, and my relationship with him for the last 15 years, and after reading this book, is not a historian. He's not a sociologist. He's not an economist. I'm a couple of those things. Ijaz is at least one or two of those things. I cannot build dams. I do not know what engineering is. I stay away from engineering and dams. I think there is a tendency for people, for lay people, to talk about things which they feel that they have confidence over. I'm also a historian. My PhD is in history. I think some of the problems that emerge in this book is around issues of history. What is the nature of history? How does one look at history? There seems to be what in historical terms one calls a teleological explanation. There is a sense of a Western historicism in this book where we are told that there is feudalism and then industrialization takes place and this is what we need to do. I think in the academia, in history, academics look at history very differently. And it's not necessarily that feudalism follows industrialization and that's the pattern forward. I think there are lots of gaps, there are lots of nuances. I think a historian and an economist and a social scientist and a sociologist could have helped a great deal in mapping this book. I think one of the weaknesses of this book is the intentions are very good. There's no question about it. Here's somebody who's actually built two dams and who's been active in them, but who talks about social relations. I think one of the remarkable things is that an engineer is concerned about social relations, and I think Naqvi Saab deserves a lot of credit for doing that. And it's a very bold thing. As I said, I would not talk about engineering or dams if I was writing a book about social change. He has taken that leap forward. But I think there are problems with that, as any historian would examine this book. I think there are also numerous statements which are made in this book, which he's also made here, about feudalism, a topic which I used to be interested in, but I think feudalism died some years ago. But there is a tendency to still say that Pakistan is quasi-feudal, and things like that, which mean different things to different people. In some ways, feudalism existed, according to this book and Naqvi Saab, 300 to 700 BC. I mean, that's kind of a long time ago, and then in the book there are times when he says this book, the Arabs, when they came in 712, they brought feudalism. So I mean, I think there are these sorts of problems about what is feudalism, why does it matter, and things like that. There are other I think things that I need to point out, because as I said, this book, my biggest problem with this book is that it tries to do everything anyone would want to do, but perhaps not as well in certain areas, because the author is not either a trained academic or is not trained in those disciplines. And there are 2 pages on the Shimla Accord and on the prisoners of the wars of 1973 and Bhutto's constitution and things like that. As history, that's interesting, but I'm not sure where that plays, what role the Indus plays in that. That's never explained. But there are lots of encounters like that, the Hudud Ordinance and Ziaul Haq, and how he sort of destroyed Pakistan. I agree with Sayyid Ali Naqvi's political philosophy, Marxism, and the way he's used this the social relations of production and relations of production framework. I think that's one of the beauties of it. And in this 21st century age, not many people can even spell Marxism. It's not spelled Markism, but that's the tendency that people have these days. So I think for me one of the most delightful things, apart from the references to Ghalib, was the fact that here is an attempt at a Marxist framework. Again, as I said, because you need social theory. There's an absence of theory. I mean, if I were to sort of summarize my main criticism of this, was there's lots and lots and lots of data, tables about dams, agrarian relations, industrialization, human indicators, and so on and so forth. But there's an absence of theory. I mean, which is not easy. I mean, even Ijaz and I, economists and others, we struggle with theory. The thing is that while we are training as social scientists, we'll acquire theory. I'm not sure that the theory of social science that engineers acquire is sufficient enough for them to write a book about social change. So, I mean, that's one of the sort of the problems with this. As I said, had this book been slightly sort of shorter, I think it would have had a far greater life. I think it would have had far more relevance. Perhaps maybe in 2 volumes, as Naqvi Saab had thought about many times earlier as well, that one book on the engineering and the dam side, which is, I think, the best part of the book, because it just shows how well equipped he is to talk about such things and how ill equipped he is to talk about other things. That is reflected in the book. So there are almost, as I said, many books in this. So that's unfortunate. If somebody has spent 30 years of their life in a book or such a substantive and heavy achievement, I think that should have worked better. There are also other problems in which the OUP, I think the publishers have done a huge disservice to the author of this book, precisely for this reason. I think had this book had a better academic editor, somebody who understood social sciences, somebody who did a more honest job, and I think, as I said, I'll say this again, Sayyid Ali Naqvi is not to blame for this shortcoming. Oxford University Press is to blame for this shortcoming, which is a tendency in most of their books. They can organize literary festivals very well, but I mean there are serious lapses in this, and I can quote you. I've read the book, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of things which just required an academic hand. In one paragraph, for example, on literacy rates in Pakistan, there are 34 statistics in 8 lines. As any academic knows, what you do is you provide a table. You don't write that the literacy rate in the Punjab is 21% in 1971 and it's 27% in 1981. You just summarize it. There are things like that. There are other numerous such problems with it, which requires a good, heavy hand of editing. And I say this because of the labor that has gone into this book, the arguments that it represents, the work that has been done. I feel that Sayyid Ali Naqvi, although he thanked the publishers, has been shortchanged by the publishers. A better book produced, that's what editors are supposed to do. Many of us have edited books, and it's one of the most difficult tasks. I think it's unfortunate that Naqvi Saab did not have a good editor. I'm going to end now because I've been somewhat critical. This is not a book which will have a reading session. It's not written by Mohsin Hamid or Muhammad Hanif. But I'm going to read one paragraph and then I'll end. And I'm going to tell you how eloquent it is. There are parts of it which are extremely eloquent, and it's not something that one finds in the 21st century reading such books, because Marxism is dead and buried. But I'm going to read just a few lines, Noman, then I'll finish after that. This is from the introduction. Sayyid Ali Naqvi writes, and I'm going to quote from them. And this is beautiful eloquence. It may be pointed out that the term relations of production refers to the relations that the people who participate in or control the process of production enter with one another. For example, in traditional agrarian society in Pakistan, the relations between landlord and his landless sharecropper denote social relations of agrarian production in feudal forms. The transition to agrarian capitalism leads to replacement of the landless and dependent sharecropper by free wage labor, and thus brings about a change in the social relations of production. The relations of production and production forces, it should be productive forces, but the production forces of a society constitute the prevalent mode of production. For example, the production forces of traditional agrarian society in Pakistan, farm, animal power, conventional farming, implementation, plough, tools, labor power of the sharecropper, etc., and the landlord-sharecropper relationship constitute the relational agrarian mode of production in Pakistan's agrarian society. The transition to agrarian capitalism leads to the change in the mode of production, represented by new productive forces, tractors, other farm, military, purchase labor power, and landowner wage labor relations of production. In a nutshell, this is illustrated in Marx's famous remark, and Sayyid Ali Naqvi quotes from Karl Marx. The hand mill gives you society with a feudal lord, the steam mill society with the industrial capitalist. End of quote. I think this is a passage which Karl Marx would have been very proud of. I wish the rest of the book, where he talks about modern developments, Sayyid Ali Naqvi talks about modern developments, had a Karl Marx sitting close by who could have guided his immense knowledge and understanding of what dams are, what engineering does, what social change is, and so on and so forth. There's one just last point which summarizes the thesis, the main thesis of this, which you probably have understood is, the thesis of the book is that, this is what Naqvi writes, is that the exploitation of the Indus generates the force that drives the process of social change in Pakistan. I think for 8,978 years he's probably right. I am not sure whether that is the case in the last 20 years. There are other forces. Globalization is something that is not mentioned in this. There is the remittance economy. And one wonders where Dr. Khatao Mal comes from, Tharparkar, which is quite far from the Indus. How social relations of production have changed there. They've changed only by building one road. So I think there is more to the story of the social change. I think the thesis is what one calls an overdetermined thesis, that the Indus may have mattered for 20 years less than 9,000 years, lagbhag. But I think that to assume that it's going to continue to there also in a sense undermines the role of high technology. There's no question about it. Ijaz is right. Water is essential. We are talking about water wars. Arif Hassan's work has shown that as well. But I think there are many more factors which overcome that handicap. And I'll stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akbar, for your remarks. I think we are now open to a question and answer session. I would request that the speaker, the audience may kindly introduce themselves and specify to whom the question is addressed.
Actually, I have to leave, so may I just respond to some of Akbar's allegations?
You see, first First of all, Akbar, you said something about Oxford University Press only being able to organize literature festivals. As you know, you're an author and you come to us again and again. I'm not sure why you do that. I would also like to say, we publish 250 books a year. We organize one literature festival a year. One of the books that we published, the author was given a PhD degree by Cambridge University on the basis of that book. He hadn't even started the program or applied for a degree. They just called him, they said, we've read your book, published by Oxford University Press, Pakistan. We want to talk to you about the book. And they had that discussion. And he was granted a degree. About the price of the book that you said, 3,000 rupees. This book is not a novel or fiction that people are supposed to walk in and buy. It is a library book. It's meant for sales in libraries. So the price, I think, is all right for libraries. I have to go, otherwise I would engage in a discussion with you. But
maybe
do think about coming back to us as publishers.
Certainly, certainly.
Since you do that again and again.
Certainly. Are you the one who asked me?
You didn't have to accept.
Just a short brief about lower riparian and upper riparian. Just here in Pakistan, my question is upper riparian and lower riparian. Lower riparian said Punjab is unjust on the water. So Zaidi Saab said that Mitti and Tharparkar is not along the Indus. These areas are Sector Biraj command area. So many of districts, many of tehsils of Mitti and also in Umarkot covered by the Sector Biraj command area. Lower and upper riparian.
Nafi sir, would you like to respond?
I do not fully understand the question.
I think he's talking about the difference between upper riparian and lower riparian.
Huh?
Upper riparian and lower riparian.
Intra-provincial disputes on water.
But this is a fact of geography. The upper riparian and lower riparian is a fact of geography. So what is the...
I don't think your question came across very clearly. Maybe Naman Sahib, you might like to just answer that if you've understood what he was trying to get at.
I think what our friend is trying to refer is the usual type of dispute and controversy that revolves around the rights of riparians, meaning the lower end of Indus, which passes through the Indus Delta, passes through Sindh and finally evolves into Indus Delta, are the people who are said to have more grievances. But if we read carefully the various allocations in the water apportionment record of Accord of 1991, some of very specific mentions about the safeguard and the enforcement procedures are laid down there. So in certain cases the disputes are resolved, but I think a more scientific analysis is needed to cover through that very, I would say, controversy-laden attribute.
The thing is that the book also presents this thing, that this problem of the upper riparian, it does appear in the book, and how it was at various times the issues were raised, and at various times those issues were examined and resolved, and some remain unresolved also. There is no doubt about that, and the book also covers that. The purpose of the book is not to present any solution, that this should be done like this. The book doesn't say that. The book only presents to the reader the information on the basis of which an informed debate can take place on the issues which remain to be resolved. You see, in 1903, the Viceroy of that time created the Irrigation Commission, It was called Indian Irrigation Commission. And that commission examined various schemes presented to the commission by Punjab, by Sindh. And Sindh at that time was not a separate province. It was part of the Bombay presidency. But still, Sindh commissioner enjoyed a lot of autonomy, and they presented, even Sakka Barrage proposal was presented in 1903 before the commission. And the commission examined it and came to the conclusion that this is not the time for constructing the big barrage. It is neither economically feasible at this time, nor it is necessary. This was their conclusion. I am not supporting that. I am only telling you this is what happened. The report is there. The report is quoted there. So you can draw your conclusion. And then in 1920s, 1920s, early 20s, the government of India agreed to the Sakai barrage, new design which was presented to them. And by that time, so more studies, hydrological studies had been carried out, and it became clear that Sakai barrage and with that the Satluj Valley Canal project, both of them could go together. So this was done. Both the projects were constructed in 1920s and opened in 1930s. So this is how it was resolved. So that, and then, but still the question of Bhakra Dam was also raised at that time. That was also on the issue, and that was kept in cold storage. But you see, what I mean is that these issues have been agitated and solutions have been found and resolved. The book presents only the information about that. How they will be resolved? They will be resolved by means of a very, very informed debate. If the debate is based on certain ideas which are traditional ideas, then one would never come to a conclusion. You could come to a conclusion on the basis of very solid information, which should be. This is what the intention of the book is. I may not have succeeded in presenting the information fully, and I have accepted. I have said that I don't claim that I have done the job as should be done, but I have tried my best to present the information to enable an informed debate to take place.
मेरा एक सिंपल क्वेश्चन था डॉक्टर अजैदी साहब से. आई एम सरप्राइज, मैंने किताब तो नहीं पढ़ी है अभी तक, लेकिन जो रिमार्क्स अबाउट द फ्यूडलिज्म, कि फ्यूडलिज्म खत्म हो रही है इस मुल्क से या पर्टिकुलरली, आई थिंक दैट इज वेरी क्रिटिकल. वी हैव टू, फ्यूडलिज्म हैज रिवाइव्ड, आई वुड से, सिंस आई हैव बीन वर्किंग इन द रूरल एरियाज, particularly the north of Sindh. It has a different face now. The scholars and researchers have to go back and revisit their theory and the views about the feudalism. So I am just disagreeing what you said.
I agree.
Do we have room? Okay. So this brings us to the close of this session. I thank the distinguished speakers, the author, the panelists, and the audience for taking part in this launch, and I hope that you would take out time to read this book and be more enlightened. Thank you very much.
Regardless of what
Akbar has said, not all books have to have a theoretical framework. I think this is an extremely well-written, erudite, and informative book, and I strongly recommend that we all read it.